Well, what's up, everybody? Welcome back. I have guests today, unlike most days. Okay. Eddie Yoon and Christopher Lochhead are authors of multiple best-selling books, including Play Bigger, Snow Leopard, and their most recent book, The 22 Laws of Category Design. And I put links to all that stuff in the description if you want to go check it out, along with their website, Category Pirates. But guys, I gotta tell you, I couldn't be more excited to have these guys on the show with me today because they've not only helped help me improve my business and have had an impact on my business, but more importantly is they have completely redefined and transformed the way that I think about marketing, and that's why I wanted to get them on and have them talk to you, because the depth and breadth of their knowledge and skill at this is. I mean, I consider it to be unmatched, basically, from anything else that I've seen in the market right now. So it can be an interesting conversation. Guys, welcome to the show. I appreciate you all being here.
Thanks, Jason, for having us.
Yeah. So I want to just for a minute. I want to geek out on you guys. I don't normally do this. Normally it's my wife. It's funny because we lived in Los Angeles for a number of years, and my wife just loves D-list celebrities. Every single one that's waiting tables in West Hollywood, we got to stop and take pictures. And that's just, it's kind of never been my thing. But I'll say, you guys talk about like super consumers of your stuff. And if there's, I found out about you guys, I want to say 6 months ago. And since then, I've consumed everything that you guys have written, listened to a bunch of podcasts that you guys have done. And I'm trying to think about why that was. And it's funny because there was nothing you can equate it to. So when I think about it, I say, if you ever come into contact with something, an idea or a frame that kind of shattered everything that you thought you understood about marketing, about branding, and so much so that you really you can't wrap your head around it in the beginning, but instinctively, like intuitively, that this is the way, like that you've misunderstood it, and that now that kind of last piece slides into the puzzle. I feel like that's what category design is. And so let's just start off with a simple question. Can you guys explain what is category design, and how is it kind of uniquely different than branding, or even, I would even say, niching down, if you guys can do that? And I'll just go, Eddie, I'll go to you first.
Sure. So I've done business strategy, growth strategy work for 20 plus years for the largest companies. And the simplest way that I look at it is that category design sits above every other strategy out there. And in the same way, I think Christopher always uses this example of the way humans function is categories first. Like, we can't do anything in life without putting it into a bucket. If I run into somebody, you're a stranger, I'm going to ignore you or move on my way. If I put you into a bucket of someone important, I might gawk and stare. You were talking about D-list celebrities, right? If I put you in the bucket of you might be my soulmate, I'm going to pay quite a bit of attention to you in that regard, right? And that this is even before I know who you are, what your name is, or anything about you. I'm already categorizing people into the relevant, importances in my life. And that when it comes to businesses, whether you're a Fortune 100 company, a small business, or a solopreneur, one of the things that I think is so important to realize that your customers are doing the same thing, not only to you, but to every other thing that they're interacting with. Is what bucket are you falling into? Are you the annoying vendor that keeps calling me and I'm going to ignore? Or are you the person who is so thoughtful that even if I never transact with you, I always come away learning something new that, as you said, changes the way I see the world? I'm always going to pick up the phone or answer the email or the text with it, right? And that at some level, the simplest way to think about it is it's the first place that you start, and that everything that you do running your business strategy-wise has to follow from that place. If you miss this part, then you could have the best strategy underneath it executed the best way, and you may miss the boat. Like I remember the best way I describe it is Phil Marino was the CEO of Quaker, and then he ran Levi's for a while. And he was a longtime client of my old firm. And remember when jeans went skinny? They were 501s, and then they got baggy, and they got skinny again. They got, like, I remember one of those transition points when it went baggy. He had just finished out a massive supply chain reengineering project to get more efficient at making good old 501, blues. And then as the fashion changed, the category of jeans changed, he said, wait a minute. So you're telling me I have the fastest, most efficient, lowest cost structure, most powerful supply chain for the wrong category of jeans? I think we're going sideways here, right? Like everything was irrelevant, even though they had done everything perfectly. But that first assumption is the one that led him astray.
Yeah. So then how does it, can we more distinctly, because this is a really hard thing, I think, for the audience to get is category is not your brand. You say that people want to put you in a bucket. It's funny because I teach this ever since I started teaching, marketing and more specifically branding. I always talk about people want to put you in a box. So you got to figure out what box you want to be in because they have a hard time. Not everybody can be a Joe Rogan. There's very few of those that he's an MMA fighter and he's also a podcast host and a television star. Like there's very few people like that. Most of them have to go into a box. And so you got to kind of decide that. But how does category then connect to brand, or does it not? Because I know you guys wrote in the brand lie, which I really loved because you talked about Gary VD and just the way that everyone these days all uses the same. I see you laughing, Christopher. I thought it was great because I kind of been bagging on him for years, and finally I found a kindred spirit in that. But the funny thing about it is like everybody uses the same model. It's the Gary V model of branding, which is terrible. But then if you're not supposed to do that, how does category design work, or what's the distinction between the two? Chris?
Okay. So I just want to underscore a little bit about what Eddie said and then jump into where I think maybe you want us to go. So the reason category design works on one dimension is it's the way the human brain works. And if I say a brand to you without a category, you're going to ask what the category is. So I'll give you a simple example. Let's play a little game. I live in Santa Cruz, California. One of my favorite restaurants here in Santa Cruz is called Gabriella's. Let's say, Jason, you and Eddie are here. We're visiting. We're having a nice time. I want to go have a nice meal. And I say, hey, I want to invite you to one of my favorite restaurants, Gabriella's. What's a question, a logical question you might ask me?
What kind of food is it?
Exactly. And I would tell you it's California Italian fusion. And it's freaking fantastic at it. And now, why do you ask what kind of food is it?
I would assume it's because I want to classify in my own mind what to expect and how to create a frame around what we're going to be doing.
Yes. And so that's how the human brain works. I need to understand what kind of thing it is before I care about the thing, and certainly comparing one thing to another thing. Here's a simple example. I don't have children. I'm a very engaged uncle, but I don't have children. I love muscle cars. Every dime Chrysler spends marketing their Voyager minivan to me is lighting money on fire. Why? I don't give a shit about the category. Therefore, I don't care how great the brand is. I don't care if the new Voyager minivan can spin and make donuts, and I don't care what it does. I'm not buying one because I don't care about the category. You know what category I like? I like SUVs and muscle cars, right? And so I filter out everything that's not that as a way of being able to process information. So the first sort of aha is category design works because that's how the human brain works. Another simple example, Jason, how's the grocery store organized?
Yeah, by categories of food. Yeah, by types.
Right.
Yeah.
And it starts with mega category, and then it comes down and down and down to subcategories or niches, right? Mm-hmm. So you have the produce section, right? Well, guess what? They put everything that's considered produce in there. And then inside produce, they've got mushrooms over here, and then the mushrooms are organized by type of mushroom. They don't have this mushroom over there and that mushroom over near the bread, or it's organized, right? And then, of course, in produce, I got tomatoes, and I got da-da-da-da-da-da, and they're all bundled together, and the different types of tomatoes, and on and on and on. What's that? The human brain needs a filing system to put things in, and this is incredibly important from a business perspective and frankly a life perspective, to equate value to. In my mind, fresh baked bread is more valuable, sits in a bucket, in a file folder, is more valuable than frozen bread. So it starts to get very granular, not only in terms of organizing the information in a person's head, but also where the value of certain things are above or below others. And so that's why category design works. Now, the second piece is the really big aha once you get that. There are about 100,000 marketing books on Amazon. And there's about 60 or 70,000, Eddie, business strategy books. And me, Eddie, and our partner, Kat, haven't read them all. But we've read a lot of the big ones, like I'm sure you have and many others. And the vast majority of them are about the same thing, Jason. How to compete. And so when we say innovation, when we say entrepreneurship, when we say marketing, what most people assume, there is a undiscussed, unchallenged, unconsidered assumption, radical assumption that virtually everybody makes, which is we are going to build a better product and a better brand and a better distribution system, better business model, and we are going to compete for market share. And that's what the vast majority of those marketing and strategy books are about. And that would be great if it worked. But here's the aha. Let's get to the data. We did a data science research project that we published in the Harvard Business Review that showed that in tech market categories, on average, the leader, the category queen or king, if you will, earns 2/3, 76% to be exact, of the entire value in the market category. And then more recently, and Eddie, why don't you describe the project that we did on the major corporations and their increase in value?
Yeah, I mean, companies that, so if you look at the Fortune 100 fastest growing companies, Jason, so these are not just the biggest, the fastest growing, so some of the best of the best. Of the top 100, we looked at it over 10 years, 13% fall into what our definition of category creators are, or category queens are, in the sense that they've solved the magic triangle. They've designed the product or the offer, designed the company, and designed the category. Those companies grow revenues 4 times faster than the fastest growing companies, and market cap 6 times higher than so you're talking about among Olympic qualifying trained athletes, these are the best of the best. And only a small fraction of them do that. And that in part, it gets back to what Christopher talked about of, all of this comes back to how does a human brain work and how does a human brain ascribe value to things? And that, going back to the minivan example, I have 3 kids. I love minivans. I think they're a great category, of course.
This is why Eddie and I are such great partners.
We're great partners, right? So, the question of there is no amount of branding you can do in the minivan category that will matter to Christopher. It's just lighting money on fire. And for me, it's like, well, it could matter, but it's going to matter on the margin, right? Some version of better, faster, cheaper, right? And so if you and then if we tie this all together, and this is something really, really important, is that most of what we have been taught in business is wrong, because most of what we've been taught in business comes from the military.
That's literally what is in all of the taglines on all of my stuff. Is 90% of what's taught about entrepreneurship is wrong. So I'm so glad to. I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm so glad to hear you.
Hallelujah.
Yeah. We are on the same page, and it's the reason why we write is it's the easiest and most effective way to reach the most people about the lies that people have been fed around, hey, you want to succeed in your small business, solopreneur, big, whatever, compete, right? Basically, I accept the box you put me in, and I will choose a marginal strategy of better, faster, cheaper, and hope that the bigger voice with the bigger budget doesn't beat me
Yeah, so
down.
what you're saying is like most people pick a box. So they go into business and they say, okay, what are the available boxes? And let me pick one of those. I'll look at what other people are doing in that space, and then I will try and improve upon what is already there. And what you're saying is that's you're starting from the wrong point of reference. You need to be starting from saying, okay, how do we create our own box and draw a new consumer out? Yeah.
You got it.
Totally. And it's the fundamental flaw that people make mistake is that they think competing in an existing box is the safer, less risky thing.
Well,
to do.
okay, but so
Well, and it's intuitive, right? You say, well, there's a big market for, like where I live. I think it might even be a law at this point, Jason, that a new yoga studio and a new craft brewery must open every 4 weeks, because that's what's happening. And by the way, I think it's wonderful because we live in a mecca of yoga and craft beer, both of which I think are fantastic. But however, what they're doing is they're saying, oh, there's a lot of demand for yoga. Oh, there's a lot of demand for craft beer. And we'll do better yoga. We'll do. We have the best hazy IPA recipe ever. And once people taste it, they'll know. And the truth is, all of the evidence, we just shared with you some of the data. Maybe we could talk about the Josh Rowland story. I was talking about that with some friends this weekend, Eddie. But the bottom line is, people won't know. Everything we value, we've been taught to value. Everything. That's why we'll pay more for, quote, organic food than we will for inorganic food. We've been taught to value that.
Is that
nothing has any intrinsic value?
Sure. Again, I just so then you would say then that all desire is in some form or fashion mimetic. It's all mimicking what others want, and so then we want the same things, and that's how we. Is it because? This may be beyond the scope of kind of your expertise, but is that a matter of we have a really difficult time with context, with knowing what things should cost and how to value things, or is it something else?
Everything is context. That's the point. I mean, of course, human beings have natural needs, right? The Maslow hierarchy of needs is a very real thing, and we're an instinctual ape, and we do ape instinctual things, some of which we understand and many of which we don't. So there's some natural things about what drives human beings that many are expert in. And the psychology of this and the sociology of this and the understanding of the human brain is part of category design, for sure, because you have to understand who we're dealing with, and who we're dealing with are human beings, of course, right? So you can't build a business, you can't do marketing, you can't do growth strategy, you can't create a breakthrough product unless you understand something about human beings. So it's sort of got to start there. But that said, everything else we value, we've been taught to value. Human beings are pack animals, right?
Well, and you see this in what's so fascinating about that thing that Christopher keeps saying about everything we value, been taught to value. One of the greatest and most practical levers as to why your audience, Jason, will benefit from category design is that if you're in a box, you know what things cost, and the degrees of freedom around pricing are very, very small. A little bit lower, a little bit higher, blah blah blah. When you create a new box, nobody has any idea what it's supposed to cost. And so if you want to charge 10x or 100x, if you can figure out a way to design the whole category such that you can justify it, absolutely. And so if you think about pricing as one of the greatest levers, probably the most understood and the most feared, that all the studies for big companies say you raise your price, profits go up 11%. So we're talking about small marginal movements in price, right? But you talk about branding, right? People always say, I have a great brand. Okay. If you took price up 50%, what would happen? And if people are like, oh, I would never, I'm like, maybe your brand's not as strong as you think it is.
Because you get a lot of, so it also offers a lot of price elasticity. So that makes, all of that makes sense to me. But I got a feeling if I'm listening to my audience right now, one of the questions that's going to come up is they're immediately going to associate this with, okay, that's great if you're developing the next Airbnb or the next Uber, but category design must not work for me because I'm not doing that. I'm not creating some revolutionary new product. I just really like, fitness, or I really like writing, right? Something like that. And you talk a little bit about, or you talk quite a lot about languaging and the importance of languaging in what we do, because that helps create the context and also helps separate you from one box into one that you control. And you mentioned in some of your writing Henry Ford calling it the horseless carriage and giving it some new language, or when we buy pre-owned or cars now instead of used cars, or I even think of like the way we speak and use words. Like I remember for years, Apple, every time they talked about their frames of their cameras, talked about their aluminium frame instead of their aluminum frame, which brings up tin can pictures in your mind. And so my question is then how do you, let's say you're not going to be the next unicorn company. How do you design and language yourself to separate yourself from everybody else? Because it has to be different than just different words. Like there has to be something else behind it. Can you speak to that?
It's a scale like anything else. So think of it as at its core, category design is about being different, not better. It's about creating something new and different that is more exponential and less incremental. So incremental generally equal better, exponential generally equal different. And of course, that's a sliding scale. On one hand, we have Elon Musk, who says we should be able to return rockets to planet Earth. We just had Professor Avi Loeb from Harvard, the world's #1 astronomer, who the New York Times now calls the world's #1 alien hunter on. And he just discovered elements of a piece of something, an artifact that came from outside the solar system and landed off the coast of Papua New Guinea. And it's the first known interstellar piece of something to hit us, and we know it's interstellar, and we know we've never seen it before, and the best geologists have examined that stuff. The point being, it's about incremental versus it's about exponential versus incremental, and it's a scale. So here could the scale be. That's Elon Musk. That's Avi Loeb way out over here. Here's one that we could have here. It's one of my favorites. You ready? Pizza parlor opens here in Santa Cruz during the pandemic. A couple of chefs get laid off, and they open up a bake and take pizza place in a beer joint. And the guys are originally from Detroit. And so it's that thick, I think of it as like a focaccia pizza, right? However, these guys are creative. They're not trying to stick to the quote-unquote authentic Detroit pizza. And the other thing is, they're making fucking pizza. It's the most undifferentiated, highly available, highly commoditized food product you could possibly imagine. So how do you stand out and achieve a higher price point with radical differentiation? And in this case, they want to do Detroit, but they want to innovate off that. These guys are creative. They have their own ideas. They have recipes they want, blah, blah, yada, yada. So what's their category design? Inauthentic Detroit pizza in Santa Cruz, California. The sign says inauthentic Detroit pizza.
That's the name of the company, or the name of the business?
No, that's what they call themselves.
Oh, okay. So it is.
That's what they tell people they make. They say we're in the inauthentic Detroit pizza making business,
and that creates separation and differentiation. So the same thing, the
Correct.
same way you talked earlier
They're
about
not just another pizza joint. Is my point. They created something radically different in the minds of the consumer, and if you want that style of pizza, then you buy from these guys.
And there's no place else they can get it, so it creates exclusivity as well.
In this case, they're a category of one in Santa Cruz, California. And so now in a sea of a bazillion pizza joints, they stand out. and you tell your friends about them, and you say, hey, you got to go to Santa Adarius and check out the inauthentic Detroit pizza because it's awesome. It's like pizza on a focaccia, and these guys are incredible, and it's super fresh, and blah, 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 right? As opposed to just another pizza place called, Jason and Eddie and Christopher's Pizza Place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was because...
And the
yeah, go ahead,
magic
Eddie.
of that, just real quick, Jason, is that it's very well possible that someone in your listeners is not like a massive software reengineering away from success, but a few magic words away from it. That's the part of it that's so cool about category design is, yes, it can be a heavy lift and a lot of work and a redesign of everything, but I would bet you that, especially given within your audience, people who have had to they're not joiners, they're builders of some sort. A good portion of them have created a category but don't know it because they haven't languaged it. And that the part that we're getting at is, we call it kind of fall in love with the problem. And then from there, the language and the words will emerge from it. We will often say, write a love and a hate letter to the category. So whatever box you're in, you write what, the good and the bad and the ugly, what it is that you cannot stand it, and you're probably well versed in it. You just list all the dirty laundry and air it out there. And then you similarly say what you love about it and why it matters so much from it. Within that problem statement will emerge what it is your small business listener, solopreneur, you are doing that's different. And within that explanation will be the magic words that can form the name of the new category, which can be the thing that you do that lights the world on fire. Because, when there's nothing more powerful than these kind of like head shaking, arresting words that don't go together, like inauthentic Detroit pizza.
Yeah, that's a really okay. I like that. Let's talk a little bit about the problem, because you guys, I've always thought you start with the problem first and then you work your way from there. And in your writing, you said category leaders dominate because they own the problem. And when you own the problem, you become the solution. I thought that was brilliant. So you can't just solve the same problem that everyone else is solving in a better way, faster way, whatever. You have to actually reframe or redefine the problem. What is the process for doing that? How does one start with that? Okay, I see the problem in my industry. How do I go about languaging, redefining that for my audience?
Well, I have a couple of ways that I typically do it. I'm more of I love something called weird data. I love looking for stuff. That's it. I hate averages. Averages are terrible. So all your listeners should be like, you got to do averages, got to look at it. But you're looking for the nooks and crannies. Like, why are people behaving so oddly in some way, shape, or form? So I just took my brother and I just took my parents to Alaska. My dad's one of his bucket list things. And the tour guide was like, that Walmart we just passed in Wasilla is famous not only because of Palin and everything else from Wasilla, Alaska, but like it is the #1 Walmart that sells the most duct tape per store in the entire world. And it was so weird that the CEO and executives of Walmart flew from Bentonville to Wasilla to figure out what in the world was going on there, right? And what the guy was explaining is like, you go around Alaska, everybody has duct tape in your car. You carry duct tape with you because, it's Alaska. The weather could turn, anything could happen. And what do you need? Duct tape solves everything, right? We learned from MacGyver. And so when you are in unknown, uncertain, inclement conditions and, who's going to have your back, it's going to be duct tape. And that weird data explains something in a way that allows you to see, oh, okay, duct tape is not just for a little patchwork here and there. It is actually a lifesaver in certain situations. And so what else could I create? So when you follow the weird data, you will often find a super consumer, which we've also written about, and you say, what is it that you, rational human being, I would trust your behavior is not because you're insane, but that you have a good explanation behind it. Context is king. And then when you explain it, you say, oh, now it makes sense. What if Christopher, I think you've done a lot of hiking and the like, there's something to be said about Anybody who's spending time in the woods, are they carrying duct tape around with them? Maybe they should be. Anybody who's on a long road trip, do you have duct tape? Maybe you should be, right? Like now you begin to see we the three of us just now in this 10-minute, so that we've been chatting, have potentially created a new category and a new distribution model for duct tape on demand, right? Because when you absolutely have nothing else to solve for, duct tape is there for you. Like there's something in that is a problem that we didn't know that we had. How do you find those problems? You look for the weird data. You go why 7 times, and then you look for that aha. And can that problem be replicated and marketed in a way so that other people can benefit from it? But that's typically the way that I approach it. I think Christopher does it similarly, but has a slightly different attachment with it.
I 1,000% agree with Eddie, of course. And I think there's a very important thing that he says that a lot of people miss, which is if you look at the way we've been trained to analyze data, essentially what we've been communicated is, if you think about data on a bell curve, we've been taught to ignore the edges and to look at the middle, because that's where the meat is. That's where the big part of the market is. That's where the high, best margins are. Whatever. That's when the market gets really interesting. That's when it's peaking in size, et cetera, et cetera. And so we study the people who bell curve into the fat part, whether it's how they use our product or how they buy our product or whatever other customer data we might be looking at. It's important to underscore Eddie is the godfather of category science and particularly weird data. And what he's telling us is ignore the fat part of the curve and go to the edges. Because it's in the edges that we see where the top 5%, 3%, 8% of the category in terms of usage or spending or whatever other important metric, what are they doing and why are they doing it? So I think that's important. So that's sort of an analytical lens on this, critical. There's also, if you will, an intuitive or a creative piece of this. And so I want to talk about our friends at Lomi, who recently made a really big new announcement, a big new product called Lomi Bloom we're so excited about. But the thing that's cool about Lomi is Lomi has become the fastest growing new kitchen appliance in over 20 years to earn a spot on the kitchen counter. Right? So if you think about the kitchen counter, what do we have there? We have a coffee maker, we have a toaster, we have certain other things maybe we use to cook with, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a few things. And if you talk to most people, certainly most chefs, most people who care about kitchens, the space on the counter and what we do with it and where it goes and yada, yada, very important. Lomi's the first appliance to earn a spot in the kitchen in 20 years. And it's the fastest growing new appliance. Okay, so why? Lomi didn't market their brand. Lomi created a new category of smart waste appliance. It's the world's first smart home composter. And the problem they solve is, A, food waste is disgusting. It makes a mess in the house. We throw away, whether we like it or not, we throw away 40% of what we eat. And it's disgusting in our house. And when we put it outside, it attracts rats and raccoons. And it also happens to be a massive contributor to global climate change, the increasing of the heat of the planet. All right, so Lomi comes along and says, to quote the Big Lebowski, "This question will not stand, man." And Matt, the CEO, has been, quote unquote, obsessed with waste most of his life. Because waste isn't a thing that happens in nature. There's no such thing. It's a human creation. So it's like, how do we go back to that? All right, so they create this new category, and now everybody wants a Lomi because A, you solve a global warming problem, or at least in part, and B, you take some gross, yucky shit in your house and you turn it into some of the most rich dirt in the world that you can put in your plants or your garden. And so that is, in a nutshell, how to frame, claim, and name a new problem. And so Lomi owns the problem, food waste. And if you think food waste matters, and I just sort of gave you a little bit of what in category design we call a point of view. The story I told you is actually a POV. I framed the problem both at a high level, it's bad for the planet, and at a specific to you level, it's bad for your house, and then wrap in the solution, right? So that's what they've done at scale.
And so what that basically, if I'm gathering this and getting it all, then so category really defines brand, and you don't. It's almost like you don't. I don't want to say you don't need a brand, but it certainly is subjugated to the category, because if you've done a good job of framing, naming, and claiming the problem, then brand. Is it fair to say brand is inferred, or is that going too far? After that, it doesn't really matter what the name of your company is, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, you're right. I think brand becomes one of many things. There's a lot of people who would elevate brand above everything else. We would say category comes first, and then brand is in the mix with it. And that, like if you want a more, I think McKinsey did a study where it kind of analytically proves the point, which is that 60% of a brand's growth comes from the underlying category. If the category is growing, the brand's going to grow. If the category is shrinking, the brand's going to shrink. And that this is the part that I always find so interesting, is that, most marketers are trained to worship at the altar of the brand. And, like so I was, when I left my old firm, the Cambridge Group, the first HBR article we wrote was why General Mills should sell its cereal business. An article that I could not have written in my old job, right? I would have gotten into big trouble and everything else, right? So I got a lot of calls, and
how
people were
piratey
quite
of
pissed.
you, Eddie?
It was my first R as a solopreneur. But but I got a lot of people who were like, I'm glad that you spoke up, because somebody needs to, because the cereal category had lost $4 billion in the last 8 years. And unless you believe sugar or carbs are coming back, which no one does, the category of our portfolio of brands and cereal are never going to be more valuable than it is today. They're just going to go down in value. So the rational thing to do, sell them. But no CEO wants to be the guy that sold yellow box Cheerios, right? That's kind of an anathema to people and stuff. And so this is one of those things where people who don't get this will just beat their heads against the wall. They may do excellent branding work, but you can't swim against the current. If the category is shrinking, you got to get out of the category or reframe it and create a new one. And make no mistake, if the brand is growing, oftentimes about 60% of that growth becomes from the category. So let's not get too high ironal supply about how great we are.
Well, and the flip side of this too, is the mistake people make is they're in a category that is either slow growth, no growth, or down growth. Down growth is an oxymoron. And they think more branding and marketing is going to make a difference. Well, if the neighborhood's on fire, it doesn't matter how nice your house is. Get out, because the neighborhood's on fucking fire. And so category and brand but they can work together. Okay, so a super simple example. We've written a little bit about it. 4 or 5 dudes, they're buddies. I think they're in New York, if I'm not almost positive, New York. And they like to get together, drink beer, listen to Rush, eat burgers, and play video games. And they do this at each other's house. They say, how come there's no bar why isn't there a bar that we'd like to go to? So they, like a billion dudes who like to sit around and get drunk together and do dumb shit, say, let's open a bar. But they don't make the mistake by calling it Steve, Brad, Jimmy, and Johnny's Bar. They intuitively understand category design. And it's interesting, Jason, because in a lot of ways, a lot of small E entrepreneurs understand category design intuitively in a way that big E don't, because if they don't, they don't eat. So here's what these guys do. They open a bar that is that. And they declare the category as arcade bar, because the place is full of old school 80s Pac-Man and all that fun shit, right? Space Invaders, etc. So category, arcade bar. Brand, you ready? Barcade. And if you go to the Barcade website, you'll see their tagline is America's first arcade bar, or the world's first arcade bar. And now there's a whole bunch of them.
Oh yeah, there's one here in Phoenix. We love it. My wife and I go all the time.
Okay, so I'm telling you a story you know.
Yeah. No, I think
so the brand and the category can go together very, very powerfully. Another one, a simple one, is untuck it. Okay? So the category is nice shirts you can wear untucked that don't make you look like you're walking around in a fucking tent. That's it. That's the differentiation. We're not going to space. No, we're just changing the cut of a men's shirt. Okay? So the category is shirts worn untucked. The brand is untuck it. Mm-hmm. Genius. One multiplies the other.
Yeah, it's the process is not an easy one. Otherwise, everybody would do it. But I think that I want to touch on something else that I think is going to lead into the subject of content creation, and that sort of form of marketing, content marketing, because it's such a big part of what my audience is engaged with in order to promote what they're doing and establish credibility and those types of things. But if we take your concept of frame it, name it, and claim it, once we've identified the problem and we've named sort of like what the solution is, so you've come up with your unique category, there's a piece before you can start talking about it and selling people on it. You kind of have to develop a unique perspective, and you may even need that unique point of view before. Where does that fall? Like, at what point in the process of category design do you need to establish that point of view? You come up with, you look for the outliers and you find them, but at what stage do you sit down and say, hey, what is my viewpoint, opinion, perspective on this problem?
Well, to me, it's very much like how Chris Rock or Dave Chappelle develop a Netflix show. They're in the comedy club 200 times in a year to perfect the act. It's a bit of like, I think you're. There are some cases where you might land on the POV very, very early on, and that's awesome, right? But in no way, shape, or form are you not ever evangelizing the POV. And in that way, you may be in a situation, God bless you if you get it right and it's nailed from the first time, but more oftentimes than not, every step along the way, from day one, you're like, I think this is the POV. This is the problem as I understand it. Try this POV, and then the languaging process, to me, it's very much like how any great stand-up comic is honing the joke. Like that, they put in the work. I respect the profession because they're in tiny, smoky comedy clubs trying stuff out before they get to the big old $60 million Netflix special with it. And so at some level, the greatest executives, whether small business or huge companies, like truly great CEOs that we've worked with, they're always marketing the POV when they recruit, when they're selling with customers, and importantly, when they're getting analysts and investors on board. Like it is so as smart as Wall Street. They go to great schools and they work hard. You have to dumb things down for Wall Street, or any investor. Right? And anytime you're looking for cash from somebody, whether it's a line of credit or whatever, if you can't explain your POV simply and compellingly, you're going to have a hard time raising funds for that. And so I don't think you're ever not optimizing and refining the POV.
I think it's really important that everybody who's listening hear what you just said, because so many new entrepreneurs or small business owners think that before they have to have all of this figured out at the beginning. So I've got to sit down and I've got to come up with this whole big marketing plan, and then at some point I'm going to roll that out. And what you're saying is really the opposite. It's like I have this kind of unique idea, and it's not really well formulated, like a joke in the beginning stages, and I'm just going to go out and I'm going to start talking about it and see what sort of response I get from it. Is that kind of the process?
Yep, practice in public. One of our good friends, Nicholas Cole, one of our original pirates, would always talk about practice in public. Yeah. And it's one of these. It's like writing a book. The way that we write books is we practice in public with it, and it's the great misunderstanding of you got to be all buttoned up because you don't.
Chris,
you can jam with your supers on this stuff too, and I think I use the word jam on purpose. We describe Category Pirates, the three of us, as a writing band, a business writing band, because that's what we are. That's the best analogy we can possibly come up with. It's exactly what we do, just with business ideas, research, and words. And a few years back, Jason, I had these two guys on my podcast who were Berklee School of Music profs. And they wrote a great book. I think it's one of the most important books that most people haven't heard of. It's called 2 Beats Ahead. And these guys are entrepreneur and business teachers at the most legendary music school in the world, in the country, to the best of my knowledge. And what these guys did, they had this aha was, what if we go and interview some of the greatest minds in music today, ask them about their creative process, and see if we can connect some of what they do to make music to how people can build businesses and innovate and such. So they go off and do that. There's many amazing insights in the book, but the one that stuck most with me, Jason, was from Justin Timberlake. And Justin Timberlake was describing when they go into the studio, they come in with a bunch of ideas and they just jam. And they give themselves no time pressure. They're just in the studio. Nobody's looking at their watch. Nobody's answering their fucking phones. They're just jamming. Somebody comes in with some lyrics or some harmonies or some beats or some guitar riffs or whatever it is, right? Bass runs, whatever it is. And then they just start playing. And then they play and they push and they pull and they go here and they go there and they record all that shit. And here's the thing they don't do: criticize and edit. And the insight that these guys were giving us sounds very simple, but I think it's very profound, which is, and it's the way we at Category Pirates work, and it's the greatest collaborative joy of my life, is we give ourselves permission to jam and not edit. Now, of course, there's a time for editing. There's a time for going, oh, that was really stupid. Why did he even talk about that? But we got frothed up in it in the moment, and we let ourselves, I'm going to use this word on purpose, play. We learn and discover the most as human beings. We create the most as human beings when we're playing. So yes, frame, name, and claim the problem. Give the problem a name and then go play with that problem. Say, oh, did you here's the reason. The reason men have ED, well, it didn't used to be called ED. Pfizer named it erectile dysfunction. They made up the problem. You know what the term that was used for the problem before? Impotence. Well, guess what they discovered? There's no dude in the world that wants to go to their wife and or doctor or anyone else for that matter and say, I'm impotent and I need a pill. No, that sounds terrible. I don't want to have a conversation about that. But when I can say, hey, I might be having a little issue with ED, okay, maybe we can talk about a pill. So they reframed the problem so that it was less horrible sounding. And that opens up the solution. And so, yes, go out and play with it and see what works. Name, frame, and claim the problem. And then go build out the rest of the POV. And if you get the problem right, here's the part most people don't get, Jason. If you get the problem part of the POV right, the rest of the POV writes itself. Mm-hmm. And people assume you have the answer. You wouldn't be evangelizing, educating, sympathizing with the problem if you couldn't help fix the problem. That would be insane.
Right. Well, but this then now creates another problem. So we've come out and we've identified a problem. We've created what is essentially a unique problem, and we have renamed it, given it some unique languaging, and we're out testing this and our point of view in the marketplace. But oftentimes, if we're doing it right, we're saying something that is counter to the prevailing wisdom, the prevailing narrative in whatever sub-industry we're in. And you guys write about this in thought leadership and content creation. And this, I'll quote from you guys here. You say the vast majority of people who want to be thought leaders or best-selling authors in today's digital gamified world don't have leading thoughts. That is to say, they're not actually contributing new, differentiated ideas. What they want is to be seen as a thought leader, to collect badges of approval, amass followers, and social metrics that send the signal. Lots of people say that I'm important without saying anything unique, meaningful, or different. And I thought that number one, that's the way I feel every time I go on X and look at what other people in the business space are saying. But the problem with that is you run into, if you're what most people want, and you went ahead and said this in a few paragraphs later, you said, most people don't go on there wanting to be educated or be given a new idea. They're searching for validation. They're searching for reinforcement of what they already believe is true. And when you step in with something radically different, and we want to see those growth numbers come up, we want to see those followings amass so that we can start building a tribe that eventually we could sell product to. And it seems like you've got a real problem there when you go out to try and message. Is there anything you can do? First of all, have I misframed what you guys are saying? And then secondly, what do you do about that?
No, I think you have it really well done there. I mean, and it's the what would you do about it? It's almost you have to take the brand out of branding. If you branded the problem, everything would be great. Just do the same thing, but brand the problem, not the actual brand, right? I mean, the example that I always give is iRobot and Roomba was one of my longtime clients, and the Roomba has been around forever, and it wasn't until they started to brand the problem that Roombas took off. Meaning, you didn't mention Roomba. The way that you would start the conversation is, hey Jason, do you brush your teeth every day? Yeah. Do you take a shower every day? Yeah. Do you vacuum every day? If you don't, that's just as disgusting as if you don't brush and shower every day.
That's disgusting, Jason.
Yeah, how could you? So, you lay that out, and first of all, glass of cold water across the face. Like, what in the world are you talking about? And you're like, well, wait a minute. Why don't I vacuum every day? Well, that would be a real hassle. Well, what would need to be true to vacuum every day? Oh, well, you'd need a robot vacuum. Well, what would the robot vacuum need to do? It would need to be able to be controlled by your phone, go out and vacuum, go back by itself and charge, empty itself without you touching it. And if it was that easy, yeah, I'd vacuum every day. And then that you just describe the product roadmap, right? Not more horsepower, navigation, not bigger vacuum, a bigger base station. And then eventually you get to, well, shoot, who do I go to find that? Well, iRobot and Roomba is the clear market leader. That's the choice that you would get to. So the brand actually gets mentioned at the very end. Whereas now, I personally probably sold 100 Roombas just telling people about this.
And what Eddie just said is the iRobot POV. He just laid the iRobot POV down. And it's a very powerful distinction. So here's the aha. When you market your brand, I think you want my money. When you market my problem, I think you want to help me. So through that lens, if you think about what Eddie just said, Jason, 80-90% of what he said was framing, naming a problem and making that problem urgent for you. A problem that 2 seconds prior you didn't know existed. And if the POV lands, that is to say, frames, names, and claims a problem that captures your attention and imagination, then you go, maybe I should do something about this. So when you market your brand, people think that you want their money. Category is about their problem, their opportunities, not our brand. People care about them. They don't care about us. We're not trying to tattoo our logo on their head. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to help them with something, right? And so that's very powerful. There's one other element to this that's kind of a category design secret. And if you start paying attention, you'll see it everywhere. The only companies that market the problem are the category leader. And so when you market the problem, whether you are or you're not, people assume you are. When Mark Benioff goes out and howls at the top of his lungs, no software, 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 he becomes the king of the cloud and what is called SaaS, software as a service, right? He's evangelizing the new category of how to deliver software. And he spent the better part of 20 fucking years screaming no software and why buying software was dumb. Not a lot about his software. Of course he talks about his product, but that's always what he leads with. That's what category designers do. That's why they're missionaries, not mercenaries. They care. They're good. They're getting after it. There's something they see in the world, a missing, and it drives them nuts. And they got to go get after it. And that's why they're more on the missionary side and much less on the mercenary side. And yes, God bless capitalism. We're big fans of making money. Go be a billionaire. Have at it. Yay! Financial freedom, capitalism, innovation, entrepreneurship. Go. And the entrepreneurs that make the biggest difference, yes, they have mercenary elements, of course, and they're very tilted towards being missionaries generally.
Well, it's interesting too, because when we talk about this, you guys wrote something, or maybe it was on a podcast I was listening to with you guys, but it was I found it reassuring that as you're doing and going through this process, you don't necessarily have to come up with something like a purely unique term for what you do. And you guys brought up when Apple released its ocular headset. And they didn't call it a VR headset. They didn't classify it with anybody else's stuff. They used spatial computing, I think was a term that they used, and that is that's not a new term, but it's a unique term inside of the kind of the category that they want to design. And so now within that category, that spatial computing now gets assigned to them, and they can become a leader in that, whereas they'd have to be fighting with Facebook or Meta or whatever in the other market. Is that right? Yeah,
100%. What's funny is that the bar seems high to do category design, and at the same time, one of the things you realize is you can take old words from a different category into a new category. It becomes new, as you just laid out. And then similarly, I always kind of talk about is, think of, I don't know if you're a coffee drinker, but you think about all the economic activity in coffee. Would you guess that coffee consumption in America has gone up or down in the last 50 years?
Man, I would think up, but I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm setting that right, because coffee consumption per capita has been cut in half.
Really?
In the last 50 years. And yet, the market cap of all coffee-related companies has gone up by $50 billion. Why? Is because Starbucks, Keurig, Nespresso, but in particular Starbucks, they have figured out how to sell milkshakes disguised as coffee. Is essentially what a Frappuccino is, and all the stuff that you drink, with people like, and the business model is magical, right? Because they elevate, this coffee is from Ethiopia and this and that, but it's a tiny fraction of the volume of the beverage. They sell more milk than they do anything else.
Do they really?
And yet, you think of it, yes, just by volume, and it is the magical business model.
They're a dairy company, right?
I didn't know that. See,
and actually, to put a fine point on it, if I'm not mistaken, Howard Schultz is an investor in Oatly, and Oatly is the oat milk they use. So, yeah, they're a milk in all of its subcategories kind of company.
That's crazy. So I always looked at them from a perspective of they're not a coffee company. They created the third place, and that they've figured out a way to charge $3 for a 25-cent cup of coffee. But it really does go deeper than that. It really is. There's a lot of levels to category design when it's done correctly. I guess I'll just close it out. Like, I know you guys are busy. I don't want to keep you too long, but I only pay for one newsletter, and it's yours. And as I said, I get an immense amount of value from what you guys write and what you say. And I started looking around, and I said, how does a guy get trained in this? Because number one, I want to be educated enough that I feel comfortable teaching it to other people and teaching what I know. And I'm sure there are other people who say, hey man, I love this concept, but I want to be able to go through this process and do it correctly. Is there a program or anything that you guys have for that?
Okay. We're working on it. It's we're not that far from launching. Christopher mentioned our friends at Mighty Networks. One of the great online communities, which is the future of marketing. Frankly, it's going to be there. is we are launching the Category Design Academy, where we will be teaching category design. In particular, if you are any kind of advisor, agency, consultant of sorts, and you don't just want to learn it, but you want to grow your business or actually charge money by teaching this, that we're offering a set of courses and a cohort to be able to do that. So it'll be a lot of digital content in addition to the Category Pirate Substack, but also we're kind of got three pillars of the community going on. One is the people who want to learn the stuff. We got people who hire these folks. So these will be folks that are like clients of ours that are CEOs of large companies, small companies, but they've hired lots of advisors. And so you'll get a chance to kind of, quote, roll around in the dojo. Like if you want to learn the stuff and you want to practice on the CEO of XYZ company, then have at it, and they'll get feedback. And and it'll be a community where everyone can cross-pollinate and learn from each other, because we actually believe there'll be another cohort of writers who want to be like, oh, well, how do I figure out how to connect the dots between these people and that people and whatnot? So we have this grand vision. The goal is to allow people to have the benefit and the abundance of category design. It's the single number one factor that has allowed Christopher and I to do whatever we want to do in our life and have a great amount of fun. And we would be extraordinarily selfish if we kept it to ourselves. And so we're going to make it as available to as many people as we can in a way that doesn't require us to be on everything all the time.
That's the trick right there.
Well, yeah, and the reality, Jason, is the failure rate of startups is horrible, depending on whose data you believe. But it's in the 90% range. And if you look at the world that Eddie has spent a tremendous amount of time in, the kind of S&P 100, S&P 500, S&P 2000 kind of range, I mean, how many trillions get lost when companies spend money on innovative new products and they don't understand category design? There's a reason none of us had a Red Bull Cola today, right? Because Red Bull spent a lot of money. They went right at Coke and got whacked. There's a reason all the donkeys in the business media who said, oh, Threads is the Twitter killer. Threads is going to kill Twitter. Yeah, it's the fastest growing app in history. Threads is going to kill Twitter. Oh, yeah? Threads is dead. Why? You can't attack the exact same problem and the exact same solution in an existing market category where there's a category queen, in this case, Twitter. Zuck said it. They're going to lose $1 billion.
No,
this is just going to keep happening and happening. And when the Threads thing happened in Category Pirates, we wrote, how many more times does this have to continue to happen?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because as soon as it happened, I was talking with my audience, and we even did a show on it where I said, this is never going to last. It's the same product, that you're just not going to get the conversion. And then I read what you guys wrote and I said, oh, well, I might be learning something here. So
different wins, better doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great way to close out. Difference wins, better doesn't. How do people find out where do they go to find you guys? Give them the stuff.
CategoryPirates.com.
That's it? Okay. Perfect.
That's it. Everything hangs off of there.
Right on.
We'll see you on board.
Christopher, Eddie, I really appreciate you guys giving me your time and sharing your insight with the audience. It's a fascinating concept, and one that I think everybody listening should employ. So I'm looking forward to the course coming out, and that's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jason.